Hello and welcome back to Hacking Pro Tips number 9. In this interview, I get to sit down with the awesome hacker Zed Shano, who's quickly risen the ranks at BugCrowd to now be number 10 on their overall list with 169 bugs found, 2,532 total points, and an impressive 100% acceptance rate. His HackerOne stats are similar: 4.7 signal, which puts him in the 93rd percentile, 1,468 total reputation, all coming from 55 bugs across 11 different programs, which include Pornhub, Shopify, Yahoo, among others. This interview is a little bit of a different format. Jason Haddix from BugCrowd agreed to sit down with us and provide a different perspective, help me with the interview. So you'll hear him weigh in throughout, which is quite awesome from my perspective. We start with Sean talking about his experience hacking the Xbox and what that meant for him with bug bounties and the perspective that he developed approaching those targets. We then talk about relationship building and what it's meant for his bug bounty success. Again, a great piece of the interview in that Sean is candid that all of his success from BugCrowd has come from one specific program fostered by his relationship building. Maybe my favorite part of the interview is when Sean starts talking about next where he goes to dig deeper on a program. And so he talks about his experience hacking mobile, what that means, looking at endpoints. And here Jason also weighs in and talks about his experience hacking and where he went. So there's quite a bit there. It's a dense piece of the conversation. I highly recommend you pay attention when you get there. Last, we talk about where Sean goes to learn, what his advice would be to new hackers. And on that, I highly recommend you check out zedshano.com. That's where he's posting his tutorials, which we reference in the interview. So he's got 4 up there right now. I'm sure more will be coming, but we've got open redirects, IDOR, rate limiting, as well as XSS. Before I turn over the interview, just a word of caution. I don't know if it's the new format or what, but you'll hear the audio crap out in a few different places. I tried to trim it as best as I could. I do apologize for that. There's also some Darth Vader breathing throughout the interview, so I apologize in advance for that. Hopefully you can get past it, take away the key tips that are here. But with that, as always, please hit me up on Twitter at Yorsk. Let me know if these are helping you. Greatly appreciate that feedback, and we'll turn it over to the interview now. Thanks very much for listening. Sean, thanks for joining us. Not too many people.
Yeah, that's all right, mate. No worries.
Yeah. I think you and I started talking, I don't know, maybe like 7 or 8 months ago with the book. And I think our first conversation was around getting locked up. The idea of going out and hacking companies that aren't necessarily asking for it. But you've been pretty successful with that. That's something I want to talk to you
that sounds
about. Nice. So I've read a few articles about you, but I figured, and obviously we've talked quite a bit. I consider ourselves friends. So with that, why don't you kind of tell everyone that's listening to us how you got started hacking? Because I think.
Well, I've always been a bit of a nerd, and I used to be more of a gamer, more of a developer and hacker. So I used to play a lot of games like Halo 2 and StarCraft and things like that. And I saw people were basically cheating on it, so I wanted to cheat as well. So I started modding things and modding my Xbox, started coding scripts and that to cheat on StarCraft. And it kind of just went from there. And then from there, Bebo came around and Facebook, and I kind of took the knowledge and the way I thought and started messing around with websites and started finding bugs, basically. And that's pretty much how I got into hacking.
Nice. And so when you started hacking on like Halo and that kind of stuff, like where was it? Like how did that come about? It wasn't like a switch flip. So how did you have those skills? Like what got you to that level that you could do that?
Well, I saw people on YouTube modding their Xboxes and games on how to cheat and things like that. And I basically was like, let's go for it. So I just took my Xbox apart, bought a modded disc, and pretty much just learned. And then from there, I learned how people were actually making modded maps. So I started tinkering around on the computer with making things like that.
Oh, cool. Okay. So there were actual YouTube videos, tutorials, and all that kind of stuff, like people sharing information, kind of what was going on.
Yeah, that's basic. That's why I believe sharing is caring, and I'll always stand by that because I would not know what I know now if I didn't learn from other people.
And that's interesting. Because you've got a number of tutorials that are out there now. I think you're up to tutorial number 4, right? And you've covered things like XSS, OAuth, OAuth with the open redirects. And that one particularly, that helped me. You and I had a conversation about that, and I didn't realize stealing tokens versus stealing codes.
Yeah, yeah. I find some tutorials can land, and like if I find that if I'm struggling to understand a tutorial, I feel like other people will, so I try and dumb things down as much as possible so people can be like, right, here's A, B, and C, and here's the result. That's why I try release as many tutorials as possible.
Nice. Yeah, they've been super helpful for me, and anybody that's listening, I would highly recommend them, especially the open redirects and the OAuth. I mean, I had a bug that I didn't think was exploitable. I showed it to you, and then all of a sudden you came back and showed me how we could do it, which was awesome. So, taking it back to kind of how you got started, is there anything? I mean, you've clearly progressed from hacking Halo to a point where you're at now. Is there anything that you know now that you wish you knew then?
Not really, because I mean, I'm constantly growing and learning. One thing I wish I knew now, waste time.
Right.
I found back then I used to procrastinate a lot and not do a lot, but now I'm get up, straight up, hands on, straight on work.
Nice. And Jason, that takes me back to the conversation that you and I had when we did our interview, and we were talking a lot about Shot the Web, where you kind of went through the methodology of other hackers and whatnot, and there's a lot of tools, a lot of automation there. Mm-hmm. And so I'm interested, Sean, when you're hacking, when you say kind of not waste time, is it more of being focused, or is it looking at the automation, looking at the tools? Like, I don't know if you've seen Jason's presentation, but I know you use Google Dorks a lot.
Yeah, I did see his presentation. It was a good presentation, but by not wasting time, I want to know what a website, like what a company has on the internet. I want to know what they've got exposed, and I like to make lists of what's going to be pretty easy to find. You know, there's going to be a bunch of cross-site request forgery here, so I like to go for the bigger bugs that are going to pay me more and get me more rep or priority on bug crowd as it is. So by not wasting time, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. I basically want to find as much as possible so then I can prioritize my time as to where I'm going to look. So do I spend a couple of days looking in this area, or do I spend a day just completely, find like 30 cross-site scripting or something?
Interesting.
That's pretty awesome.
Exactly. I guess, so for me, with my approach, I guess I should say lack thereof, because it's really kind of where do I feel like I can, like, where can I get a hold into the program? Like, where do I see that there's, a vulnerability here where it might kind of exist over there, where, it has the design patterns from a programming standpoint, where are they kind of playing out throughout the vulnerabilities? It sounds like, it almost sounds kind of similar for you in that when you're doing that broad-based review and then kind of looking for a specific area to dive into. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's pretty much correct, yeah.
Okay. And so I know you and I have talked about it quite a bit. You've been super successful on BugCrowd, climbing the charts up to, last I talked to you, I think you were at number 10, and that was within a couple months, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that's not far off number 9. I'm hopefully going to go for number 1, but I'm kind of running out of bugs at the moment.
Yeah, the rise has been pretty meteoric, man, pretty fast. It's been fun to watch.
Cheers. I've kind of gone crazy on just this. I'm not afraid to admit it. It's one program that I basically got close with. I've shown them I can find vulnerabilities. I'm going to give them high quality reports. They love it. So they've pretty much said, like, look, have the entire scope, go do what you can do. And that's pretty much how I'm rising. There's a few other reporters, and I know they want me to get more other hackers involved because they plan on inviting some more people, which I think I mentioned to you, Pete, not so long ago.
Yep.
But yeah, I'm not afraid to admit it. I've had basically an entire company of a massive scope to go crazy, and it's been fun.
It's interesting you mentioned the relationships, because Jason, that's something you and I talked about, and it's a theme that's come up in almost every interview that I've done, is that hacking is, part knowledge, part observation, skill, and then relationships. it's interesting that they like, how does that relationship build for you, Sean? Like, what does that look like when you started out? Um, how did you build that? Was it just the high quality reports? Is it the proper, looking at the high severity and then building it from there, or is there anything special that goes into that?
Well, basically, I got invited to their Flex program. I found a couple of bugs. Thought it was interesting that saying you're only allowed to look at this part of our website.
Okay.
And I played by the rules and I found some bugs, but it got me intrigued to thinking, why do they want us to just test this part? So I basically went and looked at their main website and found a ton of critical bugs. And I contacted Bugcrowd and said, like, look, I've kind of got these bugs. I want to get them reported. They're not in scope, but, this website obviously wants to secure themselves up. If not, they wouldn't have a bug bounty. And Bugcrowd, they set up a program for me to submit some bugs. I kept submitting bugs over and over. And it got to the point where I asked for their email address. We started emailing back and forth. And that's pretty much how the relationship grew. They were paying me fairly quickly. They were loving my reports, and we've basically become best of friends. Is the best way to describe it.
Nice, Jason. That's a topic you and I have talked about in a couple different chats. The idea of kind of limited scope, and I don't have and I don't have the benefit of being on kind of that business side. And I think when you and I talked, I always kind of approached it of, if a company's out there on the web and they have, a footprint in 5 different sites, why not go with 5 different sites? But you've also mentioned to me that you've got to manage kind of what's out there and what reports you're going to get. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that topic here for those that are listening, because I've talked to others who are kind of, then they just sit there and like, hey, if there's anything out there, I should be able to hack it. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Sure. So, I mean, in some of the older scope bug bounties, right, the scopes are really wide. And so if you can find something that nobody else has tested on, it gives you a leg up and an advantage. And that can be totally fine. But bug bounty is becoming more than just bug bounty these days. It's also becoming crowdsourced application security assessment. So that doesn't have the same kind of mantra to it where you can just go out and YOLO scope it, right? That's so yeah, I mean, if you develop a relationship with the company and submit high quality vulnerabilities and they figure out who you are and you have a high reputation score or a high acceptance score, you always have the option to come to the provider and say, hey, I know that there's a flaw here. I'm not BSing. Here's some information about it. I'd like to work with you guys just to get it reported. I don't want to, at first, I don't think you should really ask for money. But then, we've had multiple instances of, customers being like, yeah, this guy's legit. Obviously, Sean here, pretty legit. And they'll come through and they'll say, yeah, we want to invite you to this other program we have, or add these things to scope so you can go ahead and report on them. Because they see that you're a high quality researcher. So it is about building relationships in almost every way possible. It's about trying to forge them as well as, the other parts of it are building relationships with other hackers to learn. We just touched on a little while ago, but yeah, I mean, sharing tools, sharing information really makes the community a little bit better. And that's kind of my opinion on it, at least.
Nice. Sean, it's interesting to kind of hear that, and I think of the articles that I've recently read where you've kind of done at least one interview where you talked about, maybe reaching out to companies that don't have these programs and saying, hey, I found a vulnerability, and I think you've been pretty successful in getting them to, I don't want to say getting them to pay you, but you've been successful in being compensated for your time when you do that. And so is it similar to what you're doing when you work with this particular private program? What does that look like when you're reaching out to these other companies, and are you still doing that?
Carrying on from Jason, you do not ask a company for money. If they've not told you that part of their website or another website they own is not in scope and you find a vulnerability, you cannot email them the vulnerability and expect to get paid thousands or whatever it's worth. With that in mind, I always have that in mind, but it's no problem for me because hacking is fun. But I will find the bug and I will tell them about it. And if they want to compensate for it, then that's fair enough. In 9 times out of 10, they will compensate for it. They'll be like, thank you, this is cool, thanks for this, go further, and we build a great relationship. So, yeah, that's basically it. I won't necessarily wake up and think, right, I'm going to hack a random company today. It's always a case of, it's hard to explain. It's if I see a company with a bug bounty and they haven't got something in scope, then I will check what else they've got and tell them. And then if they want to reward me, they reward me.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that's part of too growing a bug bounty, right? So the customers come to, a third party bug bounty company to help run and manage what they think is prioritized as the first thing they want to test, just like you would with like a pen test or something like that, right? And then as the program, the submitters on your program, and you see what they're submitting as well, and you forge relationships with them, that's the opportunity for either the third-party provider or the researchers themselves to say, hey, we think that this site should be in scope because it's got some vulnerabilities that need to be handled. This is the threat scenario. And that's the responsible way to grow a bug bounty. So, I mean, this kind of stuff happens, quarterly. If you're with like a responsible third-party provider, they'll go over this kind of stuff all the time. With the customer, be like, hey, there are a whole bunch of out-of-scope bugs and NA bugs on this program. Do you want to include these things in scope next time around? It looks like they have some security vulnerabilities on them, and so that's the kind of way we go about it, and like from the customer service side.
On that note, I'm curious. So if there are reports that are kind of out of scope and who's ever doing the triage does mark those as non-applicable because they're out of scope. When you guys do that check-in with the guys revisit those original bugs that were marked as NA? Like, how does that work from
Absolutely.
the hackers? Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have to groom what's called the backlog, right? And so at first it's everything that's considered valid, and then it's everything that was out of scope or NA. And sometimes those are interchangeable for different reasons. We could mark an out of scope bug as NA because it had some technical impact or something like that. But eventually they all get reviewed so that we can find sites that maybe should be included in the scope. And they're all reviewed viewable by the customer anytime anyway. So yeah.
Nice. So Sean, I want to take it back to kind of that methodology that we were talking about, and I want to kind of dig into that a little bit deeper and kind of get specific. So if we take that back to you looking at this program that's got a massive footprint, if you had another program that came to you tomorrow that you're invited to, another private, and it's got a similar massive profile, like how does it look like when you're actually starting in on that site? Like if somebody brand new to bug bounties was coming to you and saying, hey, would you mind hacking with me? We'll sit down at the computer together. What's your advice to them to start doing that? Like where do you go for that methodology?
Well, if a company invited me right this second, first, what that company is about, what website, what footprint have they got on the internet? What are they about? And are they storing customer details, or what are they about?
Okay.
And with that in mind, I will think, what does the company care about the most? Because most people are going to go look for cross-site scripting and all this and that. I want to go for what they care about the most, probably their users' data. So that then goes back to the earlier question is, I want to find every single thing they've got running on the internet, all the endpoints, old code, old servers, anything. And I want to find a way to get to what information they want to protect. And that's where I will start. And then as I'm on my journey to get to that information, I'll log everything I find, like the URLs, and then I'll go back over time and find the cross-site scripting, the account takeovers, and things like that. So that's my methodology.
So when you say you're logging the URLs, is that a manual process, like just a Excel spreadsheet type idea, or?
No, if you like hundreds and hundreds of repeaters, I basically, when I'm looking for a website and I see something that's interesting, I'll always send it to repeater, name it something to come back to, or I'll test it there and then and just simply leave it. And then once I'm done hacking for the night, I'm like, right, it's time to go to bed, go chill for a bit. I'll take everything that I've got in my repeater and shove it in a text editor, and I'll list exactly what I found today, what needs reporting, what needs more work doing to it, what's interesting. And then when I start work the next day, I know exactly where to carry on from. And that's pretty much that's how I go.
Crazy. Are there any...
That's super interesting because... Oh, no worries. I was just going to say mine's similar, except for I just use highlighting in Burp, like a lot. Like I'll highlight the crap out of everything and then exporting the pro feature, which grabs all the dynamic Well, it grabs all the forms and all the dynamic parameters. I use that too a lot to capture, what are the important kind of key additions. Seems like everybody has a different way to do it.
Nice. I started going that highlighting route as well. Starting to develop like a color coding mechanism to do that as well, because sometimes there's a lot of noise occasionally on a site, and then obviously API endpoints start looking pretty interesting depending upon how a site's developed. It's interesting that you kind of take that approach, both of you. So on that note of Burp, Sean, I'm assuming you're using Burp Pro. Are there any particular plugins, or is it just like Repeater and just kind of how you discussed with the
No, I literally just have Burp Pro, no plugins, add-ons, anything like that. It's just me and Repeater, and because I don't really like automated tools and things like that. Obviously, if it's a WordPress site, you just send off WP Scan and SQL Map and Mmap and things. But for actually hacking, I like to get hands-on. I like to know exactly what I'm working with. I like to know what. So that's just me, Burp and Repeater. Just me and Repeater.
Nice. And so on that note, when you're looking at kind of websites coded in, some of the other topics that come up with other hackers, I'm thinking France specifically, and I know with my background, I've got a little bit of the developer experience there as well. Working on Xbox and that kind of thing, like, have you done the coding side yourself? I know.
Well, I mean, modern is nothing compared to the coding that you do now and things like that. But I mean, throughout my stages of coming to be a hacker, when I moved on from hacking Xboxes and games on the computer, and I started looking at websites, and there was Facebook and things like that. I was a affiliate marketer for many years, so I would look for holes in websites where it could aid me in my campaigns and things like that. So then that's where I become a developer. I started developing tools and scripts and as well. So
nice. It's interesting because like I've had these conversations with others, and even when I recently presented, I said I came at it with zero security experience, but I had that background of development. It sounds like you have that background. Jason, I know you and I talked about kind of the experience that you brought to the table. And so it's almost like to be successful in hacking, it's a general curiosity in the technical realm, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be programming. It doesn't necessarily have to be affiliate marketing or that kind of thing. But that curiosity of breaking something down, looking for holes, seems to be what makes people successful in hacking. Would you guys agree if I got it right, or is there something else that you think kind of makes you both successful?
100%. 100%. Curiosity is what makes a great hacker.
Yeah, you got to want to follow that thread or that rabbit hole, right, all the way to completion. I think that you can look at a guy like Bitquark, right? Like he was a former do security at all, and I was never a developer, but I came at it from like a networking side, and everybody will have a different background, which is kind of the beauty of the model that we're working in right now, right? It's like everybody knows some things and brings a lot of different things to the table, and the combination of them can really get out of sight. But yeah, you gotta love puzzles. You gotta love following things to their conclusions and learning new technologies. That's the one I love. Is like, especially web app hacking. It's just like every time I hit a site, especially like newer sites of startups and stuff, they're using a different server side technology that maybe I haven't tested before, and now I got to go learn something from the ground up all over again, which is pretty valuable to me, I think.
Yeah, that's. That whole concept of kind of learning new things, especially from the ground up, kind of going about it, even from the vulnerability types that you go out, I have found has been hugely successful, and that's one of the reasons why I still like to continue to work on Web Hacking 101 chapters, because I get tutorials from Sean, even digging into like there was the Google Sheets vulnerability, what introduced me into JSON hijacking. But again, a whole new world. So it's interesting that both of you guys talking about that, and Jason, you mentioning kind of that new topic and digging into it and finding new things. You and I had talked about previously the CTFs and capture the flags, and I know Sean, you and I have talked about wanting to find time to dig into those and do those as well. So I'm curious, kind of, where do you go to learn new things? If it's not capture the flags and that kind of stuff, like where are you picking up new things? Are there specific blogs, specific resources that you go to?
Um, I try read as much as possible. Like I love HackerOne disclosed bugs, and Jason, I think BugCrowd should do the same. I'd love to disclose some of the bugs I found, and but it's all about again sharing his case. Twitter, I try to follow as many people on Twitter as possible, so I can see what they're finding, and I like to note down what people have found and cool bugs, so I can never go back to them. Like that. The server-side request forgery, one of them was disclosed on HackerOne. I can't think of what it's definitely called now, but I always go back to it. But yeah, that's basically it. I just read and test as much as possible. I mean, because the programs I'm in, I guess I'm quite lucky because the programs I'm in have got huge scope, so they have so much running. So they essentially become my playground. I get to test and practice on them, essentially.
Nice. So this is something that I've struggled with, and I was trying to address with a website, building a site before I got into hacking. But I would find I would read and read and read, but I wouldn't necessarily retain everything. So when you say you've kind of noted things, maybe this is related to hacking, maybe it's not. But I'm curious, how do you retain everything? If it is so much, how do you take that? How do you internalize it? And then how do you focus it onto a site? What does that look like for you? If there's any specific technique.
I look for patterns. So if somebody discloses a bug, I'll look for where that was found in the website. Was it found on an upload feature? Are there any special parameters? And I essentially then, if I'm looking on another program and I see something that's very similar, like a local file inclusion or something, I will think in my head, bam, someone has found something similar to this, something could be here, and I will try exactly what they've tried and mess around with it, basically.
Nice. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. It's that approach to kind of practicing, right? So note kind of what you're reading, and then...
If you're looking at a program, once you've hacked for so long and found so many bugs and you get invited to a program, you know what areas of a website to look for certain types of vulnerabilities. Like if you're going to look for cross-site scripting or perhaps SQL, reject the search bar. Whereas if you want an account takeover, you're going to go straight to the account, editing your password or editing your email or something.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because I've been toying around with, and I know this is like a super simple idea, but the idea of like an application heat map, like understanding where applications are most vulnerable a lot of the time, and just teaching people from that point of view, right? Like, the idea of going after every single parameter and stuff is still valid for like scanners and automation and, some testers, but I think that, yeah, like if you're going after IDOR or something critical where you want to get credit card, it's going to be in like the user edit section of the application, right? Or if you're going after SQL injection, it's going to be after parameters that are obviously querying a database. So I think that that kind of way to do it it's a fresh way to go about it, and also can help you prioritize, which is probably what you're saying too, prioritize getting like P1 level vulnerabilities faster, I'm guessing.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
That idea of the heat map is really interesting because, when I reflect back at kind of the hacking that I've done, it makes a lot of sense, right? As I think about the bugs that I've reported, it's along those lines that you're kind of describing. It's almost kind of makes me think of the need to kind of take a step back, and I've talked about this with others, but almost clear your head, kind of refresh, recharge, and then take that approach to it. And Sean, I think you and I have talked about that as well. That need occasionally, like I think you'll step away, kind of clear your head, maybe go for a smoke, that kind of thing, and then come back at something with fresh eyes. Is that fair? Is that like the technique that you kind of will take periodically, doing this full time? Where you're obviously going to get burnt out. How do you avoid that? What does that look like for you?
To me, honestly, I don't like taking a break.
Okay.
I hate coming off of my computer and or something. Yeah. Hopefully my girlfriend doesn't listen to this. But to me it's not a job. It's more of a hobby and a passion. I enjoy messing with people's code and breaking websites and getting paid for it. So to me, I'm always learning, exploring, but if I do take a break, then as you say, I'll play a bit of Xbox, watch a bit of TV, chill with friends, have a smoke or something. But often I try to just work as much as possible, while I can. It's a fun industry.
Do you ever worry about burnout? Kind of getting tired of it at any point?
Um, well, I mean, I'm running out of bugs at the moment on this program. I wouldn't say I'm feeling burnt out. I feel more motivated to find deeper things. I feel like the easy bugs have been found, so now I need to maybe step up my game and mess around with certain endpoints even more because there might be something I've missed. So I'm kind of burnt out. I like to try and retrace my steps.
So if you don't mind, let's dig into that, because I'm really curious about that. I've been at that point where you don't want to rely on private invites, but I was relying on private invites. Felt like there wasn't anything out there left for me to find in those private invites, and I was at that point where I wasn't sure what to do. So, what does it look like for you when you say you're kind of going to reset? You're going to dig in deeper, check out some endpoints. Specifically, like, what does that look like for you?
Well, again, I'm going to think about the most critical points, so upload features of a website or where they're storing details. And I'm just going to literally give it my all and chuck as much stuff as I can at as many different endpoints to see what they are doing. I'm going to just hit the critical endpoints because I figured if you're going to get invited to a bounty that's been running for 6 months, all the cross-site scripting and cross-site request forgery for account takeover, they're probably going to be found or they're not going to get season. So I want to find endpoints where I can get to this company. For example, one thing a lot of researchers miss, and this is where I've picked up so many P1 bugs on BugCrowd, is mobile apps.
Okay.
Most mobile apps are vulnerable to IDOR, and I've explained this in my tutorial, but when you sign in to your account and edit your account settings on mobile apps, they're normally pinging an API URL with just your user ID, and you change that user ID to anyone else's, and it just gives you all of their data. I mean, I found 4 in an hour just from testing some mobile apps. So you have to think where people aren't looking, or you have to think of places where somebody might have struggled to actually get a bug there, if that makes sense. Like some bugs are not as simple as, send a script alert and it alerts. Some like remote code execution or blind SQL injection, they require more thought, and I find that people seem they struggle with a bug for so long. For example, like you, whereas somebody, not saying you're bad at hacking because you are good at hacking, but somebody who might know more about that endpoint and the errors that it might be chucking out might actually be able to get a bug there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I'd like to echo that is that the first layer of the application, if you think of like an application in this area, is the one that most of the bugs roll in like right off the bat, and then as time goes on, people either fall off because I don't know what exactly it is that makes them not go deeper, but the P1 bugs that come after the first 30 days of usually a program are deeply embedded in like the workflows, right? They're like one parameter for like the upload function that like somebody forgot to test when they integrated it a long time ago. So they get more and more embedded in the workflows of the applications, especially related to like IDORs in multi-tenant applications with multiple users with other people's data and stuff like that, and authentication issues there too. But mobile apps are absolutely correct because, like, I mean, just from knowing, having created some of the mobile standards, it's 10 years behind, like, security-wise when you start doing mobile applications, and a lot of people don't even write their own mobile applications. They farm it out to a third party, which really has no education as far as secure development goes. So, they only trust. I mean, they're assuming that the only thing that's going to touch their API that does this type of stuff is the one mobile client with an already authenticated user. So they don't build in access controls or authorization or authentication, or they don't do it well. And so, yeah, it should be like the mobile API should be on your hit list if you're struggling to find bugs on a target. Also, just like the number of testers that know how to get at those APIs, like if they're not explicitly listed in a brief, but the mobile app is, like how to reverse out the endpoints, that all itself. So there's a lot of money to be made there, I'd say.
So a couple things I want to drill down on with that one specifically. So talking about the mobile apps, right? There's obviously 2 different approaches to that, right? So by the one, it sounds like Sean LeCure and Jason, you kind of echoed this, is looking at the API endpoints that it's hitting, right? And then there's also actually, Jason, what you talked about at the end, reversing the app and so that's using, your different, I'm thinking of JD GUI, but there's also another, what is it, Mob SF or whatnot, for Android, which are two very different skill sets, right? So by the sounds of it, Sean, you're talking about the APIs. Jason, is there that same level in terms of looking at the actual Android code itself? Is it worthwhile to do that?
It depends on the application and what the application is. So we do find like good high critical paying bugs in mobile applications a lot of the time. But the meat of most of those applications, if you look at them, is actually interacting with the API. So a lot of the times the bugs are hybrids. It's not like you exploited their app and got root on the iPhone. Obviously, that's not a bug that is coming in, right? Like the secure enclaves and all of the sandboxing and stuff like that protects the phone from a lot of data leakage attacks now. And every iteration they make of the mobile OSs, the defaults as far as security goes get higher and higher and higher. So most of the critical bugs are found on the APIs. But the interesting thing is that sometimes the clients don't include the APIs as targets. So you have to reverse the mobile app in order to get the API endpoint location or its specification. Like they're not always going to release API documentation, and then you're not going to have. So that means that you're not going to have your request and response data to actually completely try on the web API. So you're going to have to reverse out the protocol and figure out what the gets and posts look like to that API. And the only way you can do that is with some mobile reversing skills. You're going to have a jailbroken device, and you're going to have to proxy the traffic, and could crack the app and things like that.
So Sean, is that kind of the approach that you're taking? You're intercepting with burp, using the burp certificate on your phone, and then kind of watching the API traffic that's going back and forth?
Yeah, that's basically what I do. I'll install the app and I'll just intercept it in burp and mess around with it. But to carry on what Jason said, I will also want to look at the source code to see if there's any undocumented URLs in there that I haven't found that might be interesting. But another thing as well that I've got a nice bounty for on a private program and that a lot of researchers don't think about is the plist files on iPhones, and I think it's on Android as well. I don't know what they're stored in. I think it's an XML file. You back up your iPhone and you're able to modify this plist file for the app. So let's say the app allows you to sign in and you bought membership on this website and you could do some cool things. Well, I found a bug that if I modified the plist file, it had a variable in there that says has paid, true or false. So I simply said true. I resent it back to my phone, opened the app, and it said, well done, you're an upgraded member, have all the features for free. So that's one thing a lot of researchers miss, I find.
Yeah, client-side controls is another big area that you can still score wins in, right? So there's database files, there's SQLite databases, and then there's plist files as well, and XML files, and all of them have configuration stuff in them. And then one of the other really cool ones that I dealt with a lot, this was even before my time at BugCrowd, but this was when I was with HP and did a lot of mobile stuff, is just documenting the API and releasing the methods. Like a lot of times these APIs just have every method open, and because they were never suspected that they would do anything other than what the mobile client told them to do. Like the delete method is open to any user, so you can delete people's data like off of the server. That was a big one. And then there's just really no authorization to grabbing other people's accounts, right? They weren't really designed for that. So the clients take care of most of the authentication. And that was a big thing when I was at HP.
Nice, that's awesome. I've experienced that as well, and I've talked to other hackers. Hopefully, there's a write-up that's supposed to be coming from a hacker who's working on Uber that's talked about that, where he changed the methods and revealed a whole bunch of sensitive information, which has been good, and hopefully that'll be posted soon on his blog. Yeah, the other one. No, go ahead.
That'd be sweet. Yeah, the other one too is giving away all my good books.
For the good of the community.
Instead of just methods mapping the API, as well as you'll start to see just keywords in the URL like as REST parameters or REST paths. And so like anytime you just see user, and sounds really dumb, right? But is anytime you see user, try the path admin, and most likely there's gonna be an admin section of like web service documentation that you'll open up that they're using to like either control analytics or control the application or the API as a whole. I've found that multiple times where in the path you just change from user to admin, you get a different set of access rights, or you get like this awesome control panel where you can just start doing random stuff. And I know that sounds silly, but that's absolutely happened.
No, and I think about it from the developer perspective as well. Working with Rails, and that's like I think most of the tutorials that I read, when you're learning, they're talking about instead of /user, it's /admin/ and then whatever you can model, echoing the models are. But you can even take that to whatever content you're working with. So instead of /users, if you have images or posts or that kind of thing, like you'll have /posts or /projects or /, and you start noticing those patterns, and you can play with them across the API as well. I've been successful with that as well. So taking it back, you guys both mentioned that mobile is one of the ways that you can dig in deeper. I'm curious if there are others that you approach. For me, I've gone the mobile route. I've gone the API route. I've also started trying to look at those application logic perspective. So are there things that developers didn't necessarily account for a user doing oddly, right? Like if I'm trying to brute force a login or something, did they account for me trying to reset my password? Or if I'm trying to get through 2FA, do they account for me sending a null byte? Do they account for me doing weird things? What are those other areas that you're looking at when you talk about beyond mobile?
So is that to me?
Either one of you guys. But yeah, let's start with you, Sean.
I don't. Could you repeat the question? Sorry, like I don't understand what you're actually asking here.
Just
like, what else am I doing on mobile apps? Sorry.
No. So if mobile is one of the ways that you're digging in deeper, are there other ways that you're digging in deeper? Are there other areas that you will go to that you don't think other hackers are going to?
Not really. I mean, it goes back to the earlier question where it's a simple case of you just have to find what this company has on the internet, and there's various methods of doing that. There's lots of scripts, Google, all that. So it's just a simple case of finding what the company has there and picking where to start, basically.
Same question to you. Are there other areas like beyond mobile that you would classify as digging in deeper?
A lot of the early success that I had at BugCrowd was finding administration portals like that shouldn't be there, like for web services running on high ports or something like that. So doing like a port scan and finding like random obscure port, realizing it was web protocol, and then finding some really unsecured janky administration console. Those are always left open on large scale IP blocks. So if the scope allowed me to, I would make sure to do that scanning and that subdomain discovery, and then find those IPs and then associate it and try to wreck those. Those were usually pretty lucrative because, like, if you can get into one of those, they're usually administering, like, something important. But the obscure bugs, like, going deeper, like, I would say that, like, file upload is a place that a lot of people score big on, but not a lot of people really have a ton of skill there. And I actually know a guy named Sarush Dali who works at NCC Group, and he writes that part of the OWASP testing guide, and it's really up to date, and he's put some of his bug bounty scoring tricks in there. So like I really subscribe to that like one page because I know he's updating it all the time. What else could I think of? Like it just like diving deeper. Yeah, like APIs, like knowing knowing how to do API testing, which is there's also some good guides on OWASP and stuff like that. Name value pairs and like trying to overwrite name value pairs that should be in requests, and how to do injection on like a REST web service, or even when you're messing with your or key value pairs, even when you're messing with those. So like those arts are a little bit above the first step of hackers, and so if you can get into there and understand what you're doing there, then that might be good. Yeah, that's what I can think of right now.
Nice. That's awesome. Sean, do you ever go after file uploads and that kind of thing? I know for me, I've been looking for resources to learn more about that. So I'm glad that you mentioned the guide is up to date. I'll definitely be taking a read of that. And anyone listening to this, I would encourage them to do that as well.
Yeah, it goes back to what I said. I want to know what the company has out there, and again, Google Doc, and you can easily find easy file upload endpoints and things like that. So once I find things that are interesting, like interesting subdomains that none of my scanners have picked up, it's a case of why I have the scan. They've also put these ones up. So then that'll be a case of then you run mmap on the interesting domains that are found and the IPs and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it.
Sean, back in, I don't remember when it was, but it must have been, I don't know, maybe February, March, or April, or something like that. One of the things that stands out in my head is, and I've heard other people talk about this, I've had people recommend it to me, is going after kind of libraries or common code that people are pulling into their web application. And I remember bringing up a few months ago because there was a time when you found that in a library that was used throughout and it was vulnerable to XSS. And you were able to take that to a few different companies. And so is that another approach that you take? Do you ever go after the libraries or look at kind of, once you've fingerprinted a site, figuring out what they're running behind it, look for those common libraries and go after those?
Yeah, of course. I mean, when you're looking at a company, most of these companies that have got bug bounties are highly visited traffic. Well, we use a lot of third-party code. Mm-hmm. So whenever I discover a third-party library being used, I'll always store it and research as much as I possibly can. I want to know what other company are using this third-party code. And then if I do find it vulnerable, then I'll go and report it to all these companies and the actual vendor.
Right. Nice. The other thing that's been mentioned, Sean, I don't think you and I have ever talked about this, but I'll throw it out to either one of you. Do you have any experience with fuzzing or looking at, say, grabbing one of those libraries and then throwing it into, what is it, I think AFL or FOL, or I can't even think of what the fuzzer is now. I'm drawing a blank. But have either one of you done that? Have you been successful if you have?
I can't say I have, to be fair.
Yeah, no, honestly, not really, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I know it's an unsatisfying answer, but yeah, I mean, usually the route can get some stuff, but going to that level, I don't want to say that it's like a waste of time, but it's a lot of effort for, some of those libraries are very publicized and have been scrutinized a lot, so I would probably just use my time on something else, I would say. I don't know, Sean, is that kind of where you're at too?
Well, I mean, it depends what vulnerability I find on this third-party service. Generally, it's just cross-site scripting, so you don't really have to go any further, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Would you use anything to specifically find the tech stack and stuff like that of the host? Like, I've used like Built With before and Wapalizer. They seem to give me like a pretty good showing of the tech stack. Are you just following every single like script on the site through Burp and just like kind of doing it that way?
No, if it's most third-party hosts, like they make you point one of your subdomains to their domain, and then they'll host the vulnerable code as such. Mm-hmm. So it's when I'm looking at websites and I'm finding subdomains and I'm finding interesting endpoints. And another key point and I'm actually due a blog post to release on this, is most researchers don't look in JavaScript files. JavaScript files have so much interesting information in them, such as hard-coded URLs, interesting endpoints you don't know. They have documentation about, who made this JavaScript file, when was it made. I find code that was written in 2008 linking to really old pages which are vulnerable. Yeah. So the key thing is just read and research as much as possible. If you find some third-party JavaScript code being used and it's vulnerable on this one website, go and research as much as possible whether this affects even more websites, and it's research and read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely true. I see that too. with other web compile technology like Flash or Silverlight or stuff like that. Like a lot of components that were mass produced like 10 years ago when that's how the web was made dynamic, like like Swift players and just all kinds of random stuff. But that those kind of things you need to dig into them and do some research and Google them, and a lot of times they're produced like a long time ago and had no security standards, and already have published vulnerabilities, and if not, pretty easy to find one in some of those older technologies.
Nice, that's awesome. It's also a great tip reading the kind of JavaScript code and looking at those.
Well, not to interrupt you, but kind of going back to that,
yeah.
There's a program on BugCrowd. I'm not going to name who they are because I don't want people to start messing around with them. But they have a domain out of scope, and I wanted to know what was running there. And it was just a login form to some analytics or something like. I looked at the JavaScript file, and there was an endpoint to create an account on there, and it was unauthorized. You could literally just ping it with the username you wanted, the password, the email, and it made the account, and I could log in, and I actually got stored cross-site scripting on this domain, but sadly it was out of scope. But yeah, again, look at JavaScript files. They have so much interesting information in them.
Nice. And I think, if I remember correctly, Philippe did an interview with you with the BugCrowd team, Jason. He talks about the exact same thing. I think he found it on Facebook where he just read the JavaScript file and was sitting and looking at him in the face, and it had been there for a while.
I'm not sure what the level of sophistication is on like link crawlers or parsers and like Burp or something like that. Like one thing I wish Burp supported was just like a lot of the times it would be useful for me to use this functionality for scoping, but for bug hunting as well too, is like to visit an in-scope domain, but the link that it saw that was not visiting, not that actually fired a request, but actually was just in JavaScript files, or I could set some custom parameter, and I wish Burp supported that. I don't think it does at this moment. I'd have to probably custom script it up, but that would be a useful thing to kind of find some of these things, because it'll pop out to you right away when you'll see like create account, inside some JavaScript thing. You're like, oh, let me go send a request there and see what happens exactly, and it'll do something bad.
So like crawling the actual JavaScript files themselves, because Burp will do the sitemap for everything that it finds on a page, but it doesn't necessarily crawl JavaScript files or whatever files might be served.
Yeah.
Right.
And also, I'm interested in not just on domain links. I'm interested in off domain links too, right? And if I'm limiting my Burp to a scope, I'm not getting that information or the context that it came from my target, but it was referenced on my target. So context in that workflow right there. I'd like to have that context.
Nice. All right. To be honest, I mean, this has been awesome. I think the mobile approach is a great piece of advice, and even looking at the different paths and whatnot, and then obviously JavaScript files. It's come up in multiple interviews. So I think there's a lot for listeners to take away from. Before we end, any parting words, Sean? Any advice? Somebody that came up to you tomorrow, beyond reading, sharing, that kind of thing, but somebody comes up to you tomorrow and just says, how do I get started? What do you tell them?
I do have my friends ask me to teach them, and I'll tell everyone what I tell them, and that's just, first of all, read. You need to understand what hacking is about. It's not about causing damage to a company and wrecking havoc and things like that. You have to understand that a company has given you permission to look on their website for vulnerabilities, so respect that as number one. Second of all, again, you need to understand what you're looking for. So read, follow people on Twitter, look at HackerOne disclosed reports, and the next step is practice. Find a website which has got a bug bounty, and even if you do not find anything, don't feel disheartened in that. You just have to understand that public bug bounties have, they've got a lot of people looking at them. So practice, just set up your own environment. It gives you a great opportunity to learn coding by setting up a vulnerable application, and there are actually vulnerable applications you can download to practice. So read, practice, apply.
Yeah, that's actually a perfect 3-word kind of thing I would give people to: read, practice, apply. You can't go far without reading. You can practice on live targets. Luckily bounty is now a thing, so You can practice on the OWASP Broken Web Application Project, any of the big large Hack Me sites. Pentester Lab is excellent too. They all have precompiled VMs where you can go and test vulnerabilities that are either new or have old vulnerabilities, just generic ones like SQL injection, so you can learn. So I mean, I think that's perfect.
Google Gruyere, I think, is the one that I used when I started.
I like Google. I don't like that one. I think that I think the best one I've ever seen has been Pentester Lab. Honestly, I think that they keep up with vulnerabilities like CWEs that are very specific to web stuff.
Nice.
And they release them all the time for free, and you get it in a VM, so you can just deploy it and start hacking on newer bugs. And then their older ones, their general web hacking ones, they offer, like 7 to 10 exercises in each area, each getting increasingly harder. So like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, takeover of sensitive pages. Yeah, so I really like them. I think they're doing great work over there.
Sweet. So on those, is it just kind of like, here's an application, go nuts, or is it like levels, like a CTF type thing?
It's like an open CTF, so they give you 7 different. It's an application already compiled, and they give you 7 challenges. You don't have to do them in any order, but they do get harder. So you can just choose whichever ones you want to do, but you don't have to like pass the level before you go to the next one. You can just skip it and go to the next one.
Oh, cool, nice.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Again, I really appreciate your time. I can't echo enough, at least how much that I've learned, and I'm sure that people listening will as well. There's been a lot of great tips here, and obviously it seems like every Hacker Pro Tip interview that I do, there's recurring themes, and so you've echoed on what all the other great bug hunters that I've talked to have been, relationships, reading, practicing, perseverance, and then digging deeper. So again, thanks very much, both of you, for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, man.